Up to September the 11th, Saddam was still a problem, a major problem. The sanctions framework was eroding. There were continual breaches of the no-fly zone. We were actually worried about enforcing the no-fly zone. You've probably seen, I think, correspondence from Robin Cook at the time to me about that. There was an attempt to put in place a different form of sanctions, these so-called smart sanctions, and perhaps we can come to that in detail a little later. And, of course, the very first military action I'd taken was with President Clinton back in 1998 against Saddam.
And we'll come back to that later, too.
And that's actually a very important moment as well. But, however, I think I would fairly describe our policy up to September the 11th as doing our best, hoping for the best, but with a different calculus of risk assessment. In other words, up to September the 11th, we thought it was a risk, but we thought it was worth trying to contain it. The crucial thing after September the 11th is that the calculus of risk changed.
I'll come on to that in just a minute. But in the period up to September the 11th, effectively, would it be right to say that containment as a broad strategy had been effective, was still sustainable, needed reinforcing, was expensive and difficult? That's roughly speaking what we've heard from some earlier witnesses, including Sir John Sawers, who was working for you at the time. He said, I think it was working, but the costs of it were quite high and there were risks to the various elements of our policy that we wanted to reduce. Would that be a fair summary?
I think the way I would put it is this, that the sanctions were obviously eroding. We couldn't get support for them. This so-called smart sanctions framework, we actually, prior to September the 11th, couldn't get support for at that time.
Yep.
So we were in a bit of a difficulty there. And, of course, the fact is that Saddam, as I say, we'd taken military action in 1998. There is a very long history, of course, of the dealings with Saddam. One of the things I've done for the purpose of the inquiry is go back through my speeches prior to September the 11th. And, I've actually got one or two of them here, but it's just quite interesting.
I want to refer back to one or two of them later on, as I'm sure colleagues will.
Well, let me summarise their impact then. Their impact is regularly through 1997, 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001, I am saying Saddam must comply with the UN resolutions and force as an option. But all of this, frankly, was in circumstances where this wasn't the top priority for us. And I remember at the very first meeting that we had, myself and President Bush, in February 2001, just after he had come to power as President of the United States, we dealt with Iraq, with Colin Powell, but it was very much in the context of trying to get a different sanctions framework in place.